cupcake. So when I was 13 years old, I started my own cake business, and cupcakes have always been a huge passion of mine because that's how I got started. Icing cupcakes may seem fairly easy to some people, however, making them look nice isn't always the easiest. There are a lot of ideas and techniques that actually go into cake decorating, especially cupcakes, because they're much smaller and on a much smaller scale. Today I'm going to go over some of those techniques. I'm going to explain the importance of why they're important for having nice looking cupcakes. So let's get into talking about some of the different techniques used when actually icing cupcakes. So the first technique that we're going to go over today is a smooth top. So a smooth top is the most commonly used. Is where you slap icing on top of the cupcake, you kind of spread it out with a spoon or even a butter knife. And it's really used all the time. It's super easy and it gets the job done really quickly, which is really nice. Although it works for a good tasting cupcake, it doesn't really matter what it looks like. A good way to make them look a little bit nicer is having a really smooth top. So something you can use for that to make it look a little bit nicer instead of a spoon or a butter knife is you can actually use a spatula. So using a spatula has its perks because it doesn't have those rigid edges like a butter knife would. And it also doesn't have those round edges as if you were to ice with a spoon. So it's super even. It doesn't really have any of those marks on there. You can easily smooth it out. So those are the perks of using a spatula versus a spoon or even a knife. A great technique that many people don't know, it does take a little bit of time, is if you end up taking the end of the spatula, putting it into a warm cup of water, which is what I have here. You kind of dry it off a little bit. You kind of dry it off. As you can tell, like it has some of those like rigid edges up top. It kind of has like that little sticking up part, things like that. If you take the spatula after you just dipped it in the warm water, it kind of melts the icing once you put it on there. So if you ice it around, it kind of gets rid of all of those marks, which becomes really easy. And one thing you can do is it also like takes away all of those like standing up parts. Which is really nice because the warm part of the spatula actually melts the icing. So let's talk about another simple way to ice cupcakes without using a spatula. So another technique for getting a really smooth top is actually using a piece of parchment paper. So parchment paper is used a lot of the time when baking, so whatever you're making doesn't get stuck to the actual pan while you're baking them. Parchment paper doesn't get stuck to the icing, which is really nice, and it allows for that smooth top. So you're going to ice your cupcake like you normally would. Doesn't really matter what it looks like. However, let the icing sit for about 20 minutes. Get for it a little bit hardened, but not fully hardened. You're going to take your piece of parchment paper, lay it on top, and you're going to kind of smooth it out a little bit. Doing this allows for the icing on the cupcake to kind of move out. It's not going to allow for all of those really rigid and access tops. So the parchment paper actually gets rid of those. The access icing on top, it makes it really smooth. Using parchment paper also doesn't take a lot of time like the spatula would. So if you were to use a spatula, you just go on, and then you'd have to get rid of the icing and go back and back. With the parchment paper, it's kind of like a one and done. Once you put the parchment paper on, it kind of smooths all those areas out. You peel it up, and then you're good to go. So it's really nice for a smooth top, and it's super easy as well. So now that we've kind of talked about the simple techniques of cupcake decorating, let's move on to a more difficult one. The next technique that we're going to talk about is the star tip method. So this tip is most commonly used when icing your cupcakes like professionally, or even if you get them done from a bakery, anything like that. So what you're going to need for this is a parchment, like a piping bag, and then I use a star tip, kind of looks like that. However, I do have some other tips that you may use as well. So this is kind of like a ruffle tip. It kind of looks like that a little bit. You can also use a smaller tip if you need to. Things like that. It kind of just depends. Whatever tip you want to use is perfectly fine. A lot of people also use like just regular round tips for icing cupcakes, which is really nice as well. So when you're going to ice your cupcake, an important thing to do is hold your arm at a 45-degree angle. When you do this, it allows for that spiral motion on top of the cupcake. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your cupcake, kind of hold the cupcake in your other hand. This allows that if anything need be, you can move the cupcake around. However, you have your arm at that 45-degree angle. It's really easy to move in that spiral motion. So we're going to start on the cupcake, kind of having my arm at that 45-degree angle, going around. You're going to go upward into that spiral motion, and then it looks like that, which is really nice. This is also, like I said, most commonly used in bakeries or professional cupcake industries. So that's another difficult technique. So in conclusion, icing cupcakes can be really fun, but also challenging. There are many simple ways and also many hard ways to ice your cupcakes. A simple technique is like using your spatula or even that parchment paper to get that smoother top. And a harder technique would be using those tips in a piping bag to kind of do that. It's also really important about the way that you hold your cupcake and learning about how much to do that. So thank you, and I hope you learned something.